Welcome back, everyone, to today's Explainer. Now, we're doing something a little bit different today. We're actually stepping out of the ordinary and straight into the shadows. We're going to explore this incredibly compelling, grim, dark philosophical fable, and it asks a terrifying yet kind of liberating question. What if finding true personal autonomy literally requires us to shatter our most comforting illusions? So we're going to unpack the entire architecture of human self-deception, follow this really intense path of a character called the nihilistic wanderer, and figure out what actually happens when the lights finally go out. Okay, let's dive right into this. There's this character in our fable known as the honest guest, and they introduce the central conflict of the whole story with a pretty heavy claim. They assert that the torchbearer's internal certainty, which is essentially our ego, our fundamental sense of safety, is really just a story we tell ourselves. To find actual real truth, the guest argues we have to abandon those comforting illusions completely. We have to embrace total self-destruction. I know, it's heavy, it's dark, but man, is it incredibly thought-provoking. Now, to really understand this wanderer's journey, we kind of need a map. And the fable uses this thing called a Fichtean dialectic. If you're not familiar, it's basically a three-part structural progression of ideas. You start with a thesis, that's your accepted reality, but then that gets aggressively challenged by its total opposite, the antithesis. Finally, the collision of those two opposing forces resolves into a synthesis, which is a higher and usually much harder truth. And this dialectic is exactly the framework we're going to use to break down this story. Part 1. Thesis, the marketplace illusion. So this is exactly where humanity begins. We're all wrapped up warmly in the sovereign light and our rather fragile human egos. The fable actually represents our collective society as this sprawling marketplace bazaar. Think high walls, a totally predictable rising sun, and a stagnant peace. This bazaar is essentially the collective story we all tell each other just to ward off the void. And it feels safe, right? But the source material makes it absolutely clear this safety is a total illusion. It's really just a highly transactional, hollow existence that merely masks the festering, chaotic reality of the universe that's waiting literally right outside those high walls. And this brilliantly illustrates how the fable maps directly onto our actual day-to-day lives. I mean, sure, we don't live in medieval walled cities anymore, but we build our very own modern bazaars out of what the text calls defensive fictions. We obsessively climb these constructed corporate ladders. We carefully curate comfortable digital echo chambers where everyone just agrees with us. We stubbornly believe that our egos are permanent and independent, and we just blindly trust that the sun will always predictably rise on our neatly ordered lives. We just wrap ourselves in this false safety, day in and day out. Part 2. Antithesis, the swallowing gloom. But, as you might guess, the walls of that bazaar just can't hold forever. Eventually, our nihilistic wanderer leaves the safety of the marketplace and steps right into the uncanny forest. And wow, the contrast here is stark. On the one hand, you have the sovereign light, that's the ego, the fragile illusion of safety we were just talking about, our thesis. But up against that is the swallowing gloom of the uncanny forest, the ultimate antithesis. The gloom represents pure cosmic indifference. When the wanderer steps into this forest clutching his little lantern of internal certainty, he suddenly realizes just how incredibly frail that light is when faced with the crushing, massive, entirely indifferent reality of the universe. And out there, standing in the dark, the wanderer is hit with a truly terrifying realization. All destinations are illusions. The cosmos has absolutely no inherent design. It has zero grand plan for you, and it certainly doesn't have any sympathy for human struggles. The very idea that you are heading somewhere meaningful, it's just another one of those defensive fictions we invent to keep the dark at bay. Part 3. Horizons as false sanctuaries. This realization forces a pretty brutal critique of where exactly we find our meaning. Just think about how often we look to the horizon as a symbol of hope or final destination. Well, in the framework of this fable, the horizon is nothing but a shimmering specter. It's a completely false promise. The text explicitly states that horizons are just artificial boundary lines drawn by weak minds terrified of the dark. By creating a destination, we're desperately trying to give our suffering a meaning that, objectively speaking, simply doesn't exist out there in the gloom.
Because we are so terrified to face this cosmic indifference, humanity engages in what the Source calls the ultimate self-deception. We just desperately invent purpose. We fabricate these cosmic parents to watch over us. We construct ancient shrines, we worship external gods, and we cling so tightly to absolute moral laws. And the nihilistic philosophy of our honest guests suggests that every single one of these things are just external sanctuaries. They're illusions entirely designed to shield us from the crushing reality of the void. So, what happens when that illusion finally shatters? What happens when you're wandering deep in the uncanny forest and the frail little lantern of your ego actually breaks?
Part 4. Synthesis. The sovereign void. The collision between that fragile ego and the crushing universe leaves us with exactly one radical path forward. Let's move to the synthesis and see how this builds into an actionable philosophy. To actually reach the synthesis, the wanderer has to take 4 brutal steps. First, reject all external gods and false horizons. Second, actively perform the necessary act of breaking your own lantern, literally destroying your own comforting illusions. Third, swallow the dying ember of your ego, turning what was once a liability into pure nothingness. And finally, number 4, in a universe that offers absolutely no power or meaning whatsoever, you just have to invent your own. By doing this, the wanderer doesn't just survive the void, they actually become it. As the text describes, this is the visceral act of merging with the terror to find a horrific, beautiful unity with the world. You completely abandon the liability of having an independent self that constantly needs protecting, and instead you just merge entirely with the terror. You literally become the master of your own nothingness. Part 5. Autonomy in the Abyss. Okay, let's step out of the uncanny forest for a second and bring this directly back to you and me. So the crucial point is this. True personal autonomy today isn't found by climbing higher up in that marketplace bazaar. It's found by recognizing the bazaar for the total illusion that it is. Becoming a master of nothingness means letting go of our societal lanterns. I'm talking about external validations, fabricated career horizons, the desperate need for some kind of cosmic reassurance. It means looking at a completely, utterly indifferent universe and deciding to forge your own self-determined power anyway. This whole fable essentially challenges us to look really closely at our own certainties. So I want you to ask yourself this. Is the light you're currently holding actually guiding your way? Or is it just a defensive fiction, merely blinding you to the profound, liberating truth of the dark? Definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself searching for the horizon. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and until next time, keep questioning the light.